I look at close-ups of Joe Root's face and he's a rabbit in the headlights.
They could take some pressure off if they were better fielders.
You either bowl at the stumps or you'll be out there at backward square leg.
Hello, welcome to Outside the Rope. Australia 2-0 up after 2 tests of the Ashes series and a chance to wrap up the series in the Boxing Day test at the MCG. Great to have Mark Taylor and Ian Chappell alongside me as we look back at what we've seen in Adelaide and ahead to Melbourne. Gents, has the series panned out the way you anticipated so far?
Well, I thought that that England had to show some real fight in preferably the first one. If not the first one, definitely the second one. Having shown very little fight, I can only see 5-0 now. And the only reason I was thinking that England might get a victory was weather. I thought they might get the best of the weather. Hasn't happened. I only see 5-0 now.
I'm very surprised, to be totally honest, man. I thought the series would be closer than it is. I've been disappointed with the way England have bowled in the series. Their tactics have been, well, questionable to say the least. And Australia have played as I thought they would. They've played very well. They've been consistent. And they've kept the pressure on England, but England haven't responded at all. So, yeah, I thought Australia would win the series, but I didn't think it'd be 2-0 up with the margins of victory that we've seen in the first 2 tests.
Yes, we'll dissect all of that. We'll also look at Marcus Harris. Suggestions he'll get one more chance on his home wicket at the MCG. He'll need some runs though. Great turnaround for Australia's coach Justin Langer in the English camp. They've got some headaches. We'll talk about that as well. And we'll ask the inevitable question, which comes up most tours recently. Is this the worst English team to tour Australia? I think my guests will have a few English teams they've played against that might be up there. But the Adelaide Test match, a comprehensive win for Australia. Now, if we think back to day one when Pat Cummins was ruled out, it was almost like the sky was about to fall in. But Australia's depth in fast bowling really shown to the fore here, wasn't it, with Jai Richardson, a 5-wicket haul in the second innings, and also Michael Neser with an overdue Test debut. Yeah,
and a good toss to win for Australia. That's the other thing that happened on day one, is that, with Pat Cummins out, both sides would have loved to have batted on that first day. The pitch at the Adelaide Oval I thought was a bit drier than we've seen in the past. It looked a bit browner to me with that sort of thatchier grass on it. It was a good toss to win, but it really was set up on day one. Australia didn't blow them away, but they kept wickets in hand. England bowled too short and too wide and didn't challenge the stumps enough. And at the end, Australia finished the day like 2 for 220, and not a big score, but in the context of the game, that put them 200 runs ahead on day one, and they never looked like going anywhere but winning the game after that.
Mitchell Starc, though, inspirational at times in Adelaide, bowled a lot of overs. Suggestions that he really relished that role leading the attack, but that's kind of his role anyway, isn't it? Bowls the first over, he's the talisman in the attack. He really stepped up, though, in this test in the absence of Hazelwood and Cummins.
Yeah, I agree with the comments made by Steve Smith. I think it's the best he's bowled for a long time. Yes, he's got more wickets when the ball has swung around and the conditions have been more conducive to swing bowling, but he seemed to step up. Even at the Gabba in the first test, he took that wicket first ball, so he had 1 for none. He ended up with 3 wickets in the test, I think, for 112. So it was a solid performance at the Gabba, but it wasn't a great one. And once again, you're worried with Cummins and Hazelwood out that now, hang on, we've lost our best 2. Now it's up to Starc, and he seemed to relish it, which is a great sign for Australia. But the only concern is that he shouldn't need that, Mitchell Starc.
Yeah.
Maybe he's the role they've got him to play, this sort of left arm enforcer, is not quite the role he likes. He likes to be the leader. Maybe that's what he needs to be told more of, that you're leading the attack, because that is, without a doubt, the best I've seen him bowl for years on a pretty flat track. It did a little bit, but he worried the English batsmen right throughout the Test match with the new and the old ball, and that's a great sign for Australia.
No Josh Hazelwood for the Boxing Day Test, a side strain, and obviously at 2-0 up, there's no real pressure on the Aussies to keep him playing, or at least bring him back potentially prematurely. The number 3, though, Marnus Labuschagne, one of our great number 3s, Ian Chappell. He's had a wonderful start to his Test career in that position. 20 Tests, an average of 62. He's made 6 centuries. Let's have a look here at his most recent scores in Test cricket, and it's quite It's quite a chart, isn't it? 103, 108, 215, 143, 162. These are first innings scores, by the way. So, as you know, Ian, batting number 3 in a first innings to set up a test is vitally important. That's what he's doing now.
Yeah, and I think he's changed his batting a bit too. Certainly what we saw in Adelaide was a lot different to what we saw perhaps in his early days. I think he's letting a lot more balls go. And I mean, he let one go and he was LBW in Adelaide, and I said to somebody, he'll let one go and it'll hit the stumps because he's letting them go too close, I think. But you can't really question his tactics because everything he's doing is turning out to be right. And I think his aim in Adelaide seemed to be, let's make the England bowlers bowl for as long as possible, and if we wear them out, then everybody down the order will benefit from that. And that certainly works. So, the tactics of Australia, you could query them at times, but they all work. And why do they work? Because England allow them to work. England don't... you've got to captain a team by a lot's here in the guts, and you see how the game's going, and your tactics, are built on by the way the opposition's playing. But I don't think Joe sees that. He seems to go out there with one plan in mind. When that doesn't work, he's got nothing else.
And I think you add in the England bowlers to that. I absolutely agree that he's letting a lot of balls go. But if he's letting a lot of balls go, that's when you, as a captain and as a bowling outfit, have to change your tactics. I was disappointed with Jimmy Anderson on day 1 of the Adelaide Test match. Now, at the end of the day, I don't know if he got 1 or 2 wickets. I think he got 2 for 60 in the innings of 30 overs. It looks okay. In the scorebooks in 10 years' time, we'll say, 2 for 60 off 30, Adelaide Oval, pretty good. But that's when you're a bowling side, day 1 Adelaide, you need to strike. And he bowled too short, he bowled too wide, a lot of balls got let go. But if Labuschagne and Smith and Co and Warner did it well also, Davey was something like 2 or 3 off 40 balls. They're letting too many balls go. You need to attack with the new ball and you need to get wickets. It doesn't matter if it's Adelaide, Brisbane or wherever. England were far too defensive with their thinking and their bowling, and Australia profited by being only 2 down at stumps on day 1.
Yeah, well, it's not just Marnus who's doing good things. You point out Dave Warner and some runs for Steve Smith in this test as well. Let's have a look at the ICC batting rankings. Now, take these with a grain of salt. They're worked out on whatever equation they've come up with. Joe Root 1, Marnus 2, Smith 3, Warner 6. Travis Head has broken into the top 10 in the world now. He's risen quite sharply there. But we've got, as far as the ICC rankings go, 4 Australians in the top 10 batsmen in Test cricket.
Yeah, and you couldn't argue, particularly with the top 3. Travis Head to come in at 10th. It was only 2 Test matches ago he wasn't playing. So he's gone.
That was a good 100.
But I think that's indicative that there's not a lot of Test cricket being played at the moment. Yeah, his 100 at the game was a good one. I liked his 50 in the second innings of the Adelaide Test when Smith and Labuschagne were struggling in that second innings when England did bowl better. We lost 3 for 7 there at one stage. I like the fact that Travis Head came in, played some shots and said, right, hang on, we're in front in this game, and then changed the momentum of the game. His second innings half-century was, to me, wasn't as important as his 100 in the first one, but it was probably a technically more sound innings than the one at the Gabba.
Marcus Harris, the one issue in the Australian top order, you'd say. He got a start in Adelaide, Ian. No more than that. You think he'll get another shot in Melbourne?
I think he'll definitely get a shot in Melbourne. And if they'd lost 1, let's say it was 1-1, that might be different. But 2-0 up, he's in. And also the other thing you've got to look at is that he was told by the selector before the first test, you're our opener, 2 or 3 days before the test was even started. Now, I think that tells you something. But if he fails again in Melbourne, then they've got a big question mark. And the guy that I would question is Renshaw, Matt Renshaw from Queensland. He got dropped on poor first-class form. Now, I don't think that's fair. I think if you're going to drop somebody, you've got to drop them on poor test match form. And his test match form wasn't poor, but he got dropped. Then he went to the middle order. Now, I think he made a mistake in going to the middle order. But to me, he's a much better opening batsman than Marcus Harris. Will he come back to Australia as an opener? Not so sure now.
He was dropped with a test average of 32. Marcus Harris's is 22.
Yeah.
There's no doubt he needs some runs. And Australia will, anyway, they'll get an opportunity after the MCG test, because I agree with Chaps, he'll play at the MCG because Australia can afford to play him. They're up 2-0. Now, win, lose or draw at the MCG test match, if Marcus Harris doesn't make runs there, Australia will be in a position to say, righto, if we're still 2-0 up or 3-0 up, you can still make a change there. And sometimes you're better off making a change when things are going well, because you can then make a change and bring another young guy in if you think someone's going to do a better job. And that's what you've got to do. It's easy to drop someone. You've got to work out, is there someone better that you think will do a better job?
That's a really good point, because Australia heads to Pakistan in March, well, at least they're scheduled to, depending on what happens around the world. Who opens for Australia in that series? Because if Usman Khawaja is brought in as a replacement for Marcus Harris, he's 35 years of age now. No, it doesn't really do much to advance the situation.
You'd have to go to a younger player. You'd have to try a Henry Hunt, or you bring Renshaw back in, or Street or something like that, who I haven't seen much of. You'd have to go to someone young with an eye to the future.
But people are forgetting why Khawaja was playing as a number 3 in Australia and nowhere else. I mean, he wasn't making any runs on the subcontinent. So what? Now you're going to pick him as an important batsman in Pakistan, where it's going to turn? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Let's talk about the English. Joe Root under immense pressure. The coach, Chris Silverwood, under huge pressure. A strange structure there in English cricket, isn't it? That the coach is essentially the overseer of the entire game of cricket in England, particularly at international level. He's the sole selector. It's a crazy setup, isn't it?
Well, it's a setup, and not just England, same in Australia. It's a setup that doesn't work. Now Mark, he's here. I don't want to, give him a big head, but one of the reasons why Mark was a successful captain is because he took charge. And when Bob Simpson was stepping forward to make the speech, Mark said, no, Bob, I'll do this. Now, everybody knows in the Australian team, Mark's in charge. And that's what the captain's got to be. Now, it would have been difficult for Pat Cummins. I'm first to admit that. But if Pat was being really serious, Pat should have just said, hey, I'm in charge. Let everybody know he's in charge. And you run the show. It's the only way the team can work. You have your people that you rely on, and I was fortunate. I had a vice captain one side of me, I had a wicket keeper the other side of me. Now there's a lot of information there, and that's what you need. The captain runs the show, but that's not to say that he does it on his own. He does it with some help. But that's the way. To me, that's the only way the system can work.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the players of today, there's no doubt, they're different to my era and before. They like having people around them. They like extra information. They like people with computers around them telling them if their front foot was in the right spot, what have you. To me, as we're seeing with England, I think it's too much analysis. It's paralysis by analysis with England. But you still, even if, no matter how much information you have, someone still needs to be the one to say, righto, boys, we've got it all now, we're all right, this is what we're going to do. And that's got to come down to the captain. Yeah. Cricket is a different game, particularly Test match cricket. You're out there for 5 days, out on the field. The coach and the gurus and the boffins with all their... They don't change the field. They don't tell you when the bowler's going to bowl. They don't say if you go for a spinner or a quick. That's you. So you've got to be the one to step up. I think Joe is sort of now trying to do it, but it's been a bit late. He's actually come out with a few statements since the last test about England not bowling well, they're bowling too short. I've assumed that's been said behind the scenes because it needed to be, but I think he's now had enough that there's too much noise in and around the team, and I suspect there's now probably a division in that team between the bowlers and Joe Root and Chris Silverwood, which is not a good thing.
What you're referring to is the interview he did with the BBC following the Adelaide Test, where he was asked about the length the bowlers were bowling, and he challenged his bowlers publicly, which is something Joe Root has never really done during his captaincy. He was asked whether the communication was there in the rooms, telling the senior quicks pitch the ball up. He said, well, I told them a few times, but they weren't listening. That doesn't point towards everything being smooth in the camp.
Well, you see, it's all down to Joe Root. It's the captain, and we talked about Pat Cummins. He's the most inspirational player in the Australian side, and you've got to have a captain who's inspirational. That's number one thing, and I look at close-ups of Joe Root's face, and he's a rabbit in the headlights. I don't see anything in that face that's telling me. Now, if the bowlers are continuing, exactly what Mark said, Broad, Anderson, everyone's clapping behind the wheel, well bowled. I'd like to clap when the guy plays forward and misses or edges, not when he goes like that. That's not great bowling, in my opinion. But if that's happening, that's when the captain needs to say, listen, guys, haven't I said bowl at the stumps now? You either bowl at the stumps or you'll be out there at backward square leg. And here, I think, is part of the problem. Broad and Anderson run their own race.
Yep.
And Jimmy Anderson, you hit on Jimmy Anderson. Jimmy Anderson's done that since who knows when.
Yep.
And he's happy with that. And he's a good, honest bowler. He's a terrific bowler in England. He's a very good, honest bowler everywhere else because his figures will always look good. But he doesn't always make the batsman play. And that's the job of the captain to say, mate, you either do it or there you go. You're out there.
So Mike Atherton has been one of the former England captains suggesting that there might be a change if they lose 5-0. And bearing in mind Joe Root's been in the job for 4 years now, and that's generally the life cycle for an England captain given the pressure they're under. There'll be a change at the hierarchy somewhere there. Do you feel it'll be hard for him to continue?
It'd be hard for him to continue if this continues on, and maybe Joe won't even want to. But once again, it's a bit like Marcus Harris as an opening batsman for Australia. You've got to make sure you've got a replacement. Now, there's Joe Root's captaincy credentials. That they look okay. 27 wins from 58 matches. That's not bad. 50% win ratio is a very good ratio for a Test match captain.
I reckon most of those are at home, though. Yeah,
that's exactly right. The record here is not good. But you've got to then say to yourself, OK, Joe, do you want to keep doing it? If they keep playing the way they're playing, I suspect he'd probably say no. Then secondly, say, who's it going to be? Who's going to replace him? Ben Stokes is the obvious candidate, but bear in mind, Ben's just had 6 months off for mental leave from the game, and he's had his injuries as well. So do you want to inflict the captaincy, if that's the right way of putting it, on Ben Stokes, who's the guy you're going to be looking for to not only take useful wickets, not only take your great catches, but make some runs also? He's got a lot in his camp to do as an England player. To make him captain again, or make him captain, may not be something that he needs and may not be the best interest of English cricket.
He has an aggressive mindset to the game, though, Ben Stokes, doesn't he?
He does, which makes you wonder, why did he play, why did he bowl and why did he bat like he did in Adelaide? That didn't make any sense to me. But if you look through that team list, Ben Stokes is the only name that comes up as an option if you're going to drop Joe Root. And there are certain players that you shouldn't make them captain. It's going to weigh them down. Alistair Cook wasn't a captain in my book. And it weighed him down. You've got to get guys who are buoyed by the job, and Pat Cummins, to me, is going to be buoyed by the job. He looks forward to doing the job. Joe, I don't think Joe likes the job, but I think he likes the rewards that come with being England captain. But you go through that list, there's only one name you can come up with, and if Ben Stokes says, mate, I don't want to know about it, where do you go from there? Send up a prayer.
Yeah, as far as changing the England team, it's not easy given there's no state cricket on this tour either, so they're going to be making changes on net form.
Well, their selections are bad. Their selectors should cop just as much of a boot up the backside as Joe Root, because you cannot pick Josh Buttler as a wicketkeeper. I mean, he's not even the best keeper in the group. Never mind, the extended group where Folks should have been the wicketkeeper, because he can bat as well. But he's far and away the best wicketkeeper. Johnny Bairstow's a better keeper than Josh Buttler. So if you're going to only pick one from the squad, it's got to be Johnny Bairstow. I mean, I'd be picking Folks, but now, if you want to pick Josh Buttler as a batsman, I mean, they'll be fooled again by what Josh Buttler did in the second innings. He hung around and they'll say, oh, yeah, he showed a lot. But what did he do when it mattered? He did nothing. He got out.
And he could easily have got a pair.
He should have got a pair, yeah. So that's the thing you've got to look at. What do guys do when it really matters? That's how you should be picking a cricket team. And on that basis, you can't have Josh Buttler that's one. Rory Burns, I can't have him as an opener. I think Ollie Pope can play a bit, and I think there's a couple of other young... Zach Crawley, I think, can play. I think Lawrence has got a bit of ticker about him. But England don't work that way. It's all concentrating on technique. Oh, mate, your technique, you've got to put the front foot over it. Mate, just go out and hit the ball, score some runs.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and yet they pick a guy like Rory Burns, and which is quite strange. But I agree. I would be, for this Test match and beyond, I'd be going, all right, who do we, in the group that we've got, really want to play? And I'd be thinking younger more than older, and I'd be saying, who's going to give us some life? Because there's been a lethargy in the team. And
Fielding's terrible.
Yeah, right from the top down. They need to find...
Butler's dropped 5 catches, and I think the running total is 14 catches they've put down in the series.
And that's because a lot of the time they're not in the game. They're so lethargic. The over rates are slow. That suggests to me that there's not an urgency out there to bowl good deliveries. And then when you play at a certain pace, everyone's in the game. When you play slowly, everyone gets slow. And then an opportunity comes along, as it did with, say, Marnus Labuschagne. First night, he's on 90-odd. Second new ball, he nicks one straight to Josh Butler, who drops it. Because they're all half asleep. It's almost like we've been out here 5.5 hours of really slow cricket, and they've fallen asleep. And the next morning, you can just about bet Josh Butler will stand on his ear and catch Marcus Harris down the leg side. Because he's awake. You've got to keep that energy up for the game. You do that with younger blokes who want to play, who want the opportunity. So I would be looking to youth. I do like Hamid, even though he hasn't made any runs so far in this year. A couple of 20s, then a couple of misses out. But he's one.
Got a ripper.
Yeah, he's got a ripper, and he's one guy in the field who I think's done all right. He's chased around. He's made some good stops. He would be in my side. I wouldn't have Rory Burns either. I think you've got to make a change there, and maybe it's Crawley or Lawrence. I don't know that they'll know who's in better form. Start there. Ollie Pope probably stays because of, once again, the energy and the youth. And I'd be starting to think about not just this next 3 Test matches, but where's England cricket going to be in the next 6 months?
They've got to find a spinner for Melbourne too, and they had 2 leg spinners out here, Mason Crane and Matt Parkinson. They sent them both home. So it's Jack Leach or Dom Bess. This one's set up for you, Chappell. Look, I pleaded with our producer not to put this in, but he demanded I do. Can you tell chaps to give Justin Langer a rap for turning things around?
Well, okay, how many wickets has he taken? How many runs has he made? They're the guys. It's Pat Cummins, and okay, Pat was shunted, unfortunately, because I think he'll be a good captain. But Steve Smith came in and did the job you'd expect him to do. So it's those guys who win the cricket matches, and it's the players, and it always will be, because that's the game of cricket. As Mark pointed out, it's a different game. You can have a guy who makes a plan. You can have a distance runner who makes a plan for the player's fitness. But the first thing I'd say to him is, mate, cricket is a different game. Now, I'll just take 2 from my era. Bill Lawry and Bob Simpson were the 2 highest scorers in our team, and neither of them ever ran a lap of the oval in their life. They did a lot of gardening and stuff, but they were mentally very fit, and if you wanted them to bat for 2 days, they bat for 2 days because they wanted to, and that's the sort of game cricket is. So don't worry about Langer turning things around. It's Pat Cummins and the boys who've turned it around.
And I absolutely agree with that, but I go back 3 or 4 months ago when Langer was under pressure, because apparently the players didn't like the fact that some of the way he relays information didn't work, which I didn't like. Because it's not Langer's fault Australia lost last year against India, and it's not Langer's fault Australia have turned it round. It's the players, both ways. And the players want people around them, like coaches and as I said, people who do data and what have you. That's good. That's fine. But you then can't use them as a crutch to say things are the problem because it's there. Langer is the coach of the Australian cricket team. He's been put in there to assist. The players get the wins and the losses and they get the raps when they play well, and they should get the criticism when they don't play well. That's the way it's always been. And so, as I said, Langer, to me, whether winning or losing it's not irrespective. It's not
because of him.
Yeah, not because of him. It's he's there doing his job as a coach. That's what he's there for. Players have got to take the responsibility of wins and the losses.
When you think about the MCG and Ashes moment, you think about the king of the MCG, Shane Warne, who dominated up the ground for so many years. The 700th wicket was the one we think of more recently, but you go back to 1994 and a very famous hat-trick.
continuing. Oh, and hit the pad. Yes, he's got him. That's out. LBW. That hit the pad, and that is the end of De Freitas. Well, he's kept them so quiet. They've hardly scored a run off him, and now Warner's struck as well. Oh, and that's out. Caught behind. Yes, he's got him. Fast ball. Beautifully bowled by Warren. Got just pushing forward. A faint little touch there. It bounced a little bit. May have been off the glove, but that is the end of Gott. 2 wickets in 2 balls. Well bowled. There we go. Fleming took the last one. Merv Hughes before him. A great moment in his career. What a catch by David Boone. You won't see many better catches than forward short leg than that one. The Aussies are all around, and have a look at that. Fleming alongside Warren there, the last two to take a hat-trick for Australia. What a moment.
Yes, what a catch by David Boone. Maybe the best short leg fielder Australia's ever had, gents, mainly because he didn't have to bend down.
It helped. But interesting, Boone came into the Australian side as not a very good fielder. And one thing that Simo did do was got hold of Boone and said, righto, you're not going to be in the slips because you're not catching well enough. And he made him into a very good bat pad. Yes, he was tough in there as well, which is typical Boone. But he really improved his catching because he worked at it. And as you say, that catch he took there off Warney, it was just capped off a great, not a day for Shane Warne, but also we won that test match comfortably. A good bat pad can make a big difference.
We heard Tubby go off with the Peter Siddle hat-trick the other week. Ian, what about Tony Gregg? That was a great piece of commentary. He went right off there too, the late, great Tony Gregg.
Tony wasn't one to let a controversy die quickly.
Now, gents, we've dug right back into the archives here. Can you ever remember David Boone without a moustache?
Oh.
Well, there he is.
No.
Late 70s, this one.
Different bloke.
Well, I remember David Boone, he was probably 16, might have just been 17. He hit the winning runs for probably the under-19 Australian team in a match. Frank Twistleton was the manager of the England side, I reckon, and it was an older side. Tony Gregg was the bowler, and he swept him for 4. And in 1989, David Boone swept Nick Cook for 4 for the winning runs of the Ashes. Yeah. It was exactly the same shot, and that would have been Boone, I reckon. He wouldn't have had a moustache on then. I played, my last season was 79-80. We played in Devonport, first game of the season. David Boone played in that game. Wow. That would have been his first game, and I reckon he would have done it without a moustache.
There you go. He played against him without a mo. One of the greats.
There you go.
Tubby, we're going to throw the new ball. Some chin music.
My chin music for this week is on the back of the David Boone stuff. I just mentioned that Boone came into the side not as a great catcher, and by working hard on his fielding and his catching, he became a very good bat pad. My chin music today is for our younger cricketers coming through, is to continue to work on your fielding. I look at Marcus Harris and I look at Travis Head. Now, Travis Head's now not under any pressure anymore, but Harris still is. They could take some pressure off if they were better fielders and good catchers. If they were slippers or a good bat pad, that's an extra string to your bow. It's something else you can bring to the team. And at the moment, neither of those two bring anything to the team. I contrast that with Cameron Green, who comes in and was brilliant. He looks a really good gully fielder or probably a slipper. He's a big lad, but he gets down well, he saves runs. He's a sort of guy that Australian cricket should be producing all the time of our young guys. They're professional cricketers now from a very young age. Don't just be a batsman who passes all the fitness tests and what have you. Be a batsman, a good fielder, and it might be you're a cover or a backward point or a slipper, but be a good fielder as well, and it'll help take the pressure off when you have a bad run of outs, because it'll be when.
Just quickly before your power rankings, how good a cricketer is Cameron Green going to be in the long term?
Well, we're yet to see that. We've heard a lot of reports about how good he is, but he's not that good yet.
But to your eye, going forward?
Oh, he's got a lot of ability, but I've seen plenty of guys with a lot of ability, and some of them haven't even played for Australia. I've seen some guys play for Australia and have a very good record, and they were far from the best players in the Australian system. but they were so determined. Ross Edwards is a name that immediately comes to mind. He got a lot of what he got on determination. And backing up Mark's point, he was a brilliant cover fielder who saved us runs. So if Ross Edwards made 25 when he batted, you had to add to that another 25 that he saved us in the field. So his average, in theory, was 50. And that's what you've got to do. I mean, Bradman was a very good cover fieldsman. Not a slipper, but a very good cover fieldsman. So that's a good point. You need to be a good fielder. Yeah.
What have you got for your power rankings? Top 5 players in the Ashes?
Well, I've got Labuschagne. He's a run machine at the moment. Mark talked about when you have a bad trot. He'll have a bad trot because you don't keep dropping guys. David Warner, originally I had him up there because he scores quickly. He's probably a different player now, but he's still a really important man at the top of the order. Pat Cummins, well, he's the Australian captain. He runs the show, but also he's postman Pat. If you want a delivery, here, Pat, have a bowl, because he will get you a wicket when you need it. Mitch Stark, I think, showed really good form in the last Test match in Adelaide, and I think, like Mark said, he needs to be told, mate, we think you're a leader, now go lead. And Joe Root, well, he's there because he's far and away the best England batsman.
Gentlemen, always great to chat. Have a very Merry Christmas.
So do you, mate.
And enjoy the Boxing Day Test. It's always one of the highlights of the Australian sporting calendar. All the latest news in not just cricket, but everything. wildwatersports.com.au. Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you again soon.